Hey there, everyone. This is Paul. I hope you'll forgive me for my weak voice and my tired-looking face. I've had a really rough night yesterday. I was trying to get my heater to adjust to the bitter temperatures here where I live, and I also had a long day at work that involved a lot of shouting. And I just did 3 failed attempts, make that 5 failed attempts, at making a zero escape theory video. So I decided to base a video off of the Zero Escape trilogy and use it to relate to Myers-Briggs, and that is the ENFJ. Either you feel it or you don't. So, first off, for those of you that haven't watched my Myers-Briggs channels, you know that I praised INFJs pretty highly. As confusing as they are, they're also one of my favorite types once we finally click in that communication barrier, because I myself am an ISTJ, and the INFJ is known as my enigma type, meaning good luck us getting along. But surprisingly, as I've done some reflecting, I'm realizing that the INFJ isn't necessarily hard to get along with as much as they're confusing. Enter ENFJ. Now, disclaimer to anyone who's my Facebook friend. If you're watching this, I am not pointing the finger at you. I am not saying that any of you are this terrible stereotype. Actually, I'm going to base someone from a video game off this terrible stereotype. But I have had an ex-friend that demonstrated exactly how dangerous ENFJs can be when they're under stress, and that's primarily, that's primarily what I want to talk about. So first off, let's go over the function stack of the ENFJ. So they dominate with extroverted feeling, which means that they're going to be kind of absorbing all of the emotions of everyone around them. And because their secondary function is introverted intuition, they're going to inwardly try to create a plan to create harmony between all these people that they've felt. And ENFJs also tend to like coordinating big events. They love parties. They can tend to be a bit on the quiet side if they want to. Like, a lot of ENFJs don't even admit that they're that extroverted, believe it or not. But remember that extroversion doesn't mean you talk a lot or you're quiet. It depends on how you recharge and what your central focus is. And ENFJs kind of always want to be working with people possibilities to some degree. Now, the third function of the ENFJ is extroverted sensing, which, because it's in the third position, it's a very dangerous function to have, because when an ENFJ is under stress, they can tend to resort to physical gratification to ease their pain. So I don't want to make any stereotypes here, but it's been said that tertiary and inferior extroverted sensors may do stuff like overindulge on food, money, sex, you name it. It really depends on the individual. But the bottom function is what really scares me, and that is introverted thinking. Now, introverted thinking, as opposed to extroverted thinking, is an internal basis of logic. A basis that isn't necessarily do this, but more of a way of processing how the world works and coming to conclusions based on their own reasoning. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I know based on every introverted thinker I can think of. But when it gets dangerous is when it's used as the primary function, which function stacks flip each other when someone's under stress. So if an ENFJ is under a tremendous amount of stress, they lead with introverted thinking, meaning that they're going to have this huge cycle of negative emotions and logical thoughts, and then they're going to want to appease those with their extroverted sensing, meaning that they're going to try to think of a way to get that physical sensation and get it now. And because they're under stress, their inferior function, which would normally be their dominant extroverted feeling, is completely thrown out the window. In which case, you will just have yourself crushed like a grape. I hope you know what I'm referencing. ENFJs do not hesitate, at least from my experience, to show their wrath, but they don't necessarily do it like in an outraged form, like say an ESTJ or ENTJ would, because they lead with introverted feeling. They do it in more of like a dark, sinister, almost villain-like way. From what I've seen, ENFJs have a tendency to get really, really deadly quiet when they're talking to you. And they'll try to subtly communicate what it is that they're thinking, and it's often dangerous thoughts, mind you, by their eyes or by their body movements or even the tone of their voice. But lacking the intuition during a stressful moment, they're not going to be thinking about how the other person feels. They're going to be thinking completely about appeasing the five senses. I might have missed one. Anyway. So, as a result, that makes the ENFJ actually one of the types I fear the most. Not because when they're in normal mode, they're terrible. Actually, some of my best friends are ENFJ. But they make for really, really terrifying enemies. Because if you've ever read Harry Potter, you know that Harry prefers it that Dumbledore yells. But Dumbledore hardly ever raises his voice. In fact, I did a note about this on Facebook, and I counted only 7 times in the entire series that Dumbledore yells. Because that's what extroverted feelers and introverted intuitives do when they're under stress. Deathly cold. With a lot of scheming and manipulating involved. Now, in Dumbledore's case, more the manipulating. ENFJ's case, they're probably going to want to make the person feel as much pain as possible without being outward about it. And I am tempted to mention a friend of mine that did exactly that to me, and there's not a day that goes by without me thinking of him, but I won't, because I'm trying to move on from that terrible past. However, what I do want to focus on is, in case this video is getting a bit too negative and some of you are like, gee, Paul, you're making us ENFJs sound like we're, Lord Voldemort or something. And, well, I guess it can kind of seem like that way. But the thing is, not everyone's just going to be stressed all the time. ENFJs are actually extremely forward about how they're feeling. Now, INFJs may have like their faces crinkle and they like wear their emotions on their sleeves, but they don't necessarily communicate it because they're leading with introverted intuition, and their second function is introverted thinking. So they're likely going to ponder it a bit. ENFJs leading with feeling are going to express how they feel, then ponder it. And that's what makes them extroverts, because extroverts typically think first, or sorry, other way around. Other way around. Talk first, think later. So therefore, if I'm on the phone with an ENFJ friend of mine, I'll typically get quite the blah of feelings thrown at me. If the ENFJ is feeling sad, boy am I going to hear it whether I want to or not. If the ENFJ is feeling happy, then the whole world is, brightened up. And if the ENFJ is kind of meh, I'm going to hear about it. ENFJs, at least from my experience, correct me if I'm wrong, because I really hope I'm wrong, ENFJs have a tendency to not really try to contain their rationale. They typically would go with their gut feeling. And let me get into the video game example before I go over the 9-minute mark. So there's this video game called Zero Time Dilemma, and I'm going to keep track that it's 8:25, and then post a link in the description about where you can come back into the video if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, so, are you done yet? Okay, cool. So, Carlos, I believe, is the classic example of an ENFJ. He claims that he has really good instincts, which is not really something a sensing type can brag about. Carlos is very people-oriented. He'll dive into a burning building to save his sister when he just passed the firefighting exam. I mean, if that's not extroverted feeling, either that or he's a really well-practicing Christian, Catholic, good atheist, whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't get much better than that. But it gets better. Well, better or for worse, depending on how you look at it. Eventually, he becomes so attached to Junpei and Akane, which are the two people he spent the entire game with, that he devises this devious plan to make sure that they can get out of the bomb shelter. And to make a very long story short, he ends up using a teleporter to transport them to an alternate history, and then he himself ends up destroying the teleporter, thus putting him in a life-or-death situation. He teleports to another timeline, and in that timeline, he asks the people who are alive, how do I use this teleporter? And then he uses it himself to go back in time 10 months, apparently before the bomb shelter has even been built. And he waits. And after he finally lets Junpei and Akane out of there, they let him have it. They say, did you even think for 2 seconds to try to stop Zero's mad plan for killing off 6 billion people? He said, of course not. I wanted to see you guys. And as you can probably imagine, he's never heard from again in the game's prequel/sequel. It's complicated. The point they were trying to drive, in case this is going over your head, is he was leading too much by his feelings of wanting to see his friends again, that he was totally okay with allowing Zero to go through with his plan instead of, you know, getting rid of Zero and maybe realizing that Junpei and Akane might... Anyway, for those of you that have closed your eyes, you can open them now. Okay, so, getting back to ENFJs. That's what ENFJs tend to do. They feel this strong impulse coming from the other person. But unlike the INFJ who's going to try to work out what's going on, they typically are going to simply act on it, thinking that they've got this in the bag. After all, ENFJs are known as the most effective communicators of all the myers-briggs types. They think, I got this, I can handle this, I've dealt with people all my life. It can lead to some seriously rash error judgments. So as a result, it often helps an ENFJ to have a sensor friend to say, whoa, 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 slow down. Let's think about this calmly and rationally, shall we? And so to sort of end on like how an ISTJ like myself might clash, let's get along with an ENFJ, it's hard to do because we don't share any functions in common. Plus, an ISTJ is technically a perceiving type because we lead with sensing, whereas an ENFJ is totally a J because they lead with a feeling, which is, you know, a judging function. So therefore, we might want to think things through, and the ENFJ might just jump right into it. However, if that's not enough, ENFJs are not always known for having the best of memories because introverted sensing isn't even on their function stack. So they can rely on us, the ISTJ, to provide them with some of that data that they might have just over. Also, we're extroverted thinkers, so we're not ashamed to just lay the smack down and say, you blew it, or they blew it, one or the other. Being dominant feelers, that might not go along too well because they might say, like, Paul, tone down the harshness, you're just being way too mean. And actually, I think that's what might have been my undoing with my other ENFJ friend. Here's hoping it wasn't, and that God provides an adequate reconciliation. But the point is, ENFJs can also do a form of in-your-face extroverted feeling by projecting what they believe is the emotions around them onto the person that they're in front of. Saying, oh, this person's terrible, I hate them, and blah, 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 blah. Did you consider hearing their side of the story? No. No, I feel terrible. And then comes the crying and the... all that. So, yeah, I don't want to make this over 15 minutes, so I'll leave it at that. I really hope that if there are ENFJs watching this, that I got most of the facts right. If I didn't, please correct me in the comments, because I love learning. And I'm not an ESTJ, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm always right. Anywho, thank you for listening to my spiel, even though I felt terrible physically while doing this. So, again, in the comments section, if there's certain videos you want me to make more of or less of, please let me know. And until the next one, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless.